you know, we always speak in a way about the solution of basically, I think one of the biggest fallacies when it comes to spirituality or self-improvement, and it's one of the most obvious things, but it's always overlooked by, you know, by trying to find so many solutions to problems that we don't actually have. They seem to be real, those problems, when we are in it, but the importance is to say they seem to be real. But when we look at it from the solution, we realize they're not. Like, it's like, you know, let's say somebody trying to get out of I don't know, a state of sadness or depression, or, you know, just worrying about something over and over. When we're in that kind of energy, it seems like there's no way out and it feels very heavy and so on. And when we are sort of, you know, through it and we have overcome it, it feels like, you know it's some kind of like cloud or something. And yeah, it's not really us, but we were sort of going through something in a way. And so I want to tell a story today. And then what I also want to do today is I want to go a bit into, because, you know, what we're doing here is not self-improvement, but in a way it's questioning that which we take ourselves to be, that seems to have problems and worries about the past and the future. We question whether this is actually there. And, you know, in my eyes, this is exactly the core to basically all the problems that there are, that we perceive. Because what, you know, any problem has in common, it's basically how we perceive it. So anyway, and you know, there's many stories that I always like to tell, because in my eyes they have the strongest impact. Because what happens is we take ourselves to be the sense of self, and as the sense of self we try to understand things so we don't have to go through them again and again. And what those stories do, in a way, they have the ability to take us out of what we usually take ourselves to be, and give us a, you know, new perspective, or have a new reference. Because what happens is exactly that. Everything we hear, and even the biggest wisdom in the world, if we hear that as, you know, what we take ourselves to be, which is a limiting entity, it doesn't go anywhere, because it's being manipulated. So what we're doing in a way is trying to find a new reference point, which is at the end of the day no reference point at all. And from that perspective, we can see with fresh eyes and see and experience what we truly are. So the story is as follows. It's about the sheep and the lion. And it represents basically what we go through as human beings. And we'll come to the analogy later. But so the sheep and the lion. So what happens is there's a young lion cub, and it was just going with its family on a hunt. And at some point, the little lion cub gets lost. And so the lions, they try to search for it, but they cannot find it, and so it gets lost. And the little lion cub, it just goes about its way, and it encounters a herd of sheep. So and it runs basically towards the sheep, and the reaction of the sheep is they run away, and the young cub is basically trying to chase them, but not because he wants to eat them, but because he wants to play with them, right? And at some point, like, there's the herd of sheep is very scared, and at some point they realize that actually this little cub just wants to play with them. And then they just stop running, and they realize, yeah, he doesn't see that he's a lion and he's chasing us. So what happens is soon, like, the lion ends up, you know, staying with the sheep and grows up with them. And what happens is that the lion, he takes himself to be a sheep, because he was brought up, or he's being brought up with the sheep. And so, you know, he assumes, he presupposes that that he's basically a sheep, because all he sees around is sheep. And yeah, and he takes himself to be a sheep. And so basically he's a lion, but he's taking himself as a sheep. And then what happens is he feels, you know, after a few weeks, after years, he always feels like there's something wrong with him. Like he's not, you know, he's not doing the same things as the other sheep, not as well, because he always tries to fit in. He always tries to belong to the herd of sheep. So he's always trying to, yeah, be the best sheep he can be, but he always feels something is wrong. He never feels fully alive in that. So, but he's doing a great job in adjusting and, you know, just also curling his hair the same way the sheep have them. And he's doing all this. And then at some point, the lions, you know, they see that the lion cub is there and it's growing up there, and so they chase the herd, and you know, all the sheep, they escape, and they just actually want to, you know, talk to the lion, and then they say, hey, don't you see, you see in their own language, obviously, don't you see that you're a lion? Why you're, you know, with this herd of sheep? And the lion is like, what do you mean, go away? Like I'm a, you know, he thinks they're gonna eat him, and he's like, oh my god, I'm happy you didn't eat me, but what are you talking about, go away. So there's no way that the lion, that the lions can tell the lion, the cub, which thinks he is a sheep, that he's actually a lion. And anyway, I'll come to the meaning afterwards. So then the lion cub is happy that it was not eaten by the lions, and then it basically goes on and, you know, does its thing. And then one day, all the sheep, they hear that they can become like a lion, because they hear about, you know, the king of animals, and they hear that they can chase others, so they don't have to be chased by others, you know, they don't, and so on. So they hear about being a lion, and they all, you know, they all try to become a lion, because they think once they're a lion, everything will become easier in their lives, right? Because then they're the strongest, they don't have to be afraid of any other animals. And yeah, so it's going to be great, right? We all have to become a lion. So all the sheep, they hear that message, they can become a lion as a sheep, obviously. They take themselves as sheep. Also the young lion cub, which has forgotten or not seen that he is a lion, he also hears that message. He can become like a lion as taking himself to be a sheep. So he is a lion. He takes himself to be a sheep, what I just said. And then what happens? He hears the message he can become like a lion as the sheep. And so he hears about it. You know, they all take like roaring lessons, and they all curl their hair like a lion, and they do everything. You know, they go to lion lessons, and people who have met lions in life, so they try everything to become like a lion. And the lion cub, which pretends to be a sheep also, and you know, he's doing it, and for him it may be like the most obvious thing to do and easy. But what happens is, since he takes himself to be a sheep, he never believes in himself, and he always believes that he will never be able to make it, because not because, you know, he's not getting it, but because he takes himself to be a sheep. And then one day what happens is, and so he's on that journey for, you know, 10 years, and he always thinks he gets a bit better to be a lion, but he's, you know, he doesn't believe in himself. So what happens is, then one day the lions come back, and they chase the herd, and basically everyone runs away again, and they just want to talk to the lion again, say, hey, you're not a sheep, you're a lion, it's so obvious. And then again, it doesn't work. And then one of the lions, he has the idea, he just drags them to some paddle of water. And then the lion steps to the water, and he sees a reflection of what he is for the first time in his life. And that's the moment when the lion cub realizes that he's a lion and not a sheep. And so the story, what I like about it a lot is, this is happening to us like every day, all the time. We take ourselves to be like we are, let's say in this analogy, or let's talk about the meaning. So we take ourselves, so we are the formless, the absolute. We take ourselves to be this body mind, out of habit, out of conditioning. We never question it. We are brought up like this. And then what we try to do is, we try to become the absolute as the body mind. And that's exactly the whole fallacy of this whole system, is that instead of questioning what we truly are, we buy into the idea that we are a limited, separate entity that suffers, and that's not good enough, that needs to find happiness in all the doing and all the actions and in relationships and so on. And then all the problems start, obviously, because what happens is, yeah, we take us to be separate from everything else, and then the hoax is basically we try to become the absolute as the separate self that we take ourselves to be, and that's exactly the hoax. So what I see out there in self-improvement and in spirituality, they are all great things for the body mind, right? But when you just listen and see that the hoax is not that to improve the body mind, that's a good thing to do, right? It's good to eat healthy food, it's good to go to yoga to calm the mind and to, I don't know, to do great things for the body mind, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But when we see that we try to find solutions to something we have nothing to do with, and we are the solution, the absolute, we are that at any given time, then it feels in a way very sad, or it's a very sad thing to do, because it feels like we're running against the wall constantly. Because we're trying, as I said earlier, we're trying to become the absolute as the body mind. It's like, the example I usually give, which is one of my favorite ones, is we're the screen. What we are is the screen, and there's a movie, right? And the movie is being played, and we take ourselves not to be the screen, but to take one of the action figures in the movie. And so we navigate through life thinking, pretending that we are the action figure in the movie, which by default will be either a love story, or it will be an action film, or it would be a horror movie, or whatever. And the action figure by default is touched and influenced by all the things that are happening, right? So there will be good days, there will be bad days, and there will be a lot of suffering and thinking about the future and thinking about the past and so on. But then what we try to do is, we heard about that there is a screen, and that we try, and that the more we meditate, the more we use mindfulness, the more we calm our mind, the more we try to find peace in our head, the closer we will move to the screen, to become the screen. But this will never happen. That's exactly the whole point here, is that we can never become the screen as the action figure, because the action figure will do its thing. So it's like, okay, so let's say somebody has like somebody's worried, or they cannot deal with constantly having thoughts in the mind, right? They constantly run and be like, oh, you have to do this, have you thought about this? And there's a constant thought stream, and most of us are fully identified with that. So what we're trying to do is, because we identify with the thought stream, and the thought stream by nature is very agitated, and it goes from the past to the future, It worries about the past, it feels guilty about what it has done, it feels guilty about what it should have done, what it could have done, and everything. And it worries about the future, what may happen to himself, to herself, to the family, and everything. That's sort of the constant of the thought stream. And then we are fully identified with it. That means when we have good thoughts, we feel great. And when we have not so good thoughts, bad thoughts, we feel really bad. And that means we're fully under the influence of thoughts. So thoughts dictate our lives. And that's not a healthy thing to do, because they are like this by default. They have some kind of whatever, we don't have to understand what their function is, but there's around 80,000 thoughts every day. And they even say, like, 80% of them are just the same thoughts that we thought yesterday. So when we're bound to such a system, by default, we will suffer. And so the point is not to calm down, to try to calm down the thoughts and the mind and be mindful about them and everything. There's nothing wrong with that. But the point is to see that they're not from us and about us. Because why are we interested in the thoughts? One is like, let's say number one is obviously because most of us are identified with thoughts and we're not even aware of it. So that's number one. But the other reason is because when we create a distance, say, okay, we're not those thoughts. Like the other one is we think the only interest why we're interested in thoughts is because we think they're about us and from us. That's the only point why we're interested in it. And so it's not about trying to change the thoughts, because when we believe, we can try to avoid some certain thoughts and we can change them. But if you truly look and observe very closely the nature of thoughts, you will very soon realize that they just come and go. And by trying to control them, they actually have the power to control us. And that's the first thing to see. And then, so instead of trying to calm down the mind, and instead of trying to forget certain thoughts, instead of trying to only attract good thoughts and push away bad thoughts, that makes the whole thing even worse. So the art is to lose interest in thoughts, and that the only way to do that is that we see that they're not about us. And that's the whole thing. Because as soon as we believe they're about us, we will do everything to try to change them and only attract good ones. So here's a comment from Screw Now. I get everything you say intellectually, but it kills me every time not recognizing which I am. I am being what I am, but there's nothing different in the perspective. Not that it's a goal or something. Also, sometimes there's a doubt whether I'm truly aware of being what I am, or is it just another subtle thought? Yeah, that's a good comment. So again, I get everything you say intellectually, but it kills me every time not recognizing which I am. So that's a very good, it's an evolution, right? So based on what you're saying, it sounds like you're already, if there was a path, which there is not, but let's say there was one on the horizontal level, which I sometimes say, the horizontal and the vertical. Horizontal is the becoming and the vertical is the being. So many people have that, what you say is basically they say, oh yeah, I understand it intellectually, what you're saying, but it's not my experience and I'm not sure if it is. And the answer to that is it's actually the opposite. It's our experience is of the absolute. Our experience is to be the formless. That's the experience right here, right now. There's nothing, we cannot deny that. That's the only reason why we're here. The screen, if you take this analogy, the movie can only exist within the screen, within the dimension of the screen, right? So if imagine the action figure, or no, let's say imagine the screen saying, hey, you know what? Intellectually I understand it, but it's not my experience. It wouldn't make any sense, because the screen is the only reality there is. And that's the only experience. Any experience can only exist within that screen. Otherwise, it's not visible. It doesn't come to life. So I invite you to when you have those kind of thoughts, when you say, I only understand it intellectually, question that. Question, where does that come from? Like that's where the solution is. The solution is not down the path. The further you go down the stream, the further away you go from the solution. The solution is always upstream, meaning, okay, let's say, okay, I understand it intellectually, that's already too far. There's nothing to understand here, because what you are. So imagine this is a thought stream coming into the movie, into the screen, right? The movie would say, hey, you know what? I understand it intellectually, but I don't really get it. It's not my experience yet. That's something that's happening within the movie, and the movie is not the real thing. That's what we take ourselves to be. So you see, the mind gets very, very subtle and very tricky. So the art here, the solution is not to buy into the assumption, hey, you know what, I get it, what you say intellectually, but it's good to express it and to be honest, because there are the worst cases, when people say, hey, you know what, no, I really get it. I'm the absolute. I'm, the bliss and everything. But they say it as a body mind, which doesn't go anywhere. That's the worst. So the second step is to see, hey, you know what? I express. I don't see it. I get it intellectually, but I'm not there yet. It's great to express that, but don't believe it, because as soon as you buy into that idea of, hey, I don't fully understand it yet. Maybe one day I will. Don't buy into that idea, because that's exactly the trap right there. So the solution to that trap is not to say, oh yeah, I only understand intellectually, and then you find, I don't know, a new teacher, and then you have to read another book, and you have to do not more rituals, and you have to do all those things. That doesn't go anywhere. So the solution is to say, hey, where is that thought coming? Is that true, that thought? Can I be 100% sure that this is true? And by doing that, you basically seemingly avoid going down that path, which takes you further into the problem. And spirituality, it gets very tricky, because everything becomes more and more subtle. There may be actually even, an improvement on the body-mind level, right? Which feels the effects of being smarter or wiser, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's like, I give the example sometimes of saying, hey, somebody comes and says, hey, you know what? I can show you how to get more into the moment. And you were like, oh my God, wow, really? Where can I sign up for the retreat or for the book? Because I know when the more I'm in the moment, the more I feel happy and good, right? And then, you start reading all these books about how to get in the moment, and you realize you haven't managed fully, you still fail at being more in the moment. And then you take more courses, because you feel guilty. You probably didn't do it well enough, what you read in the book, or you didn't read well enough, what, I don't know, whoever said, or you didn't do well enough in the retreat. You didn't do the exercise, not 15 hours, but you only did it 8 hours. So you always find a reason why you're not good enough in that. So the art is to understand that what you are can never not be in the moment. That's where the solution is. It's upstream. So it's always the question. Ramana Maharshi, he was always saying, always ask, basically, who am I? Like, always point towards the source of everything. So any kind of, it's not just negative thoughts, even positive thoughts, any kind of thoughts, any feelings. Just always ask, who is it that has that feeling? Who is it that feels that way? And so on. And this will point you towards the direction of what you truly are. And so I think that's very important, because, like, if I take this, under the story that I was telling at the beginning with the lion and the sheep, what would actually happen is, so that's the funny thing. So I don't know if, let's say, I'll just very briefly recap it. So a lion cub takes itself to be a sheep, and it's trying to become a lion as a sheep, which is not possible because it's already a lion. So if, exactly what you said, this comment of, I get it intellectually, but it's not my experience. So imagine the sheep, who is actually a lion, says, hey, you know what? I understand what a lion is like, but my actual experience is not that of a lion. That wouldn't make any sense, right? It would make sense from the perspective of this lion that takes himself as a sheep. It would be like, yeah, I understand. You have empathy. But when you see what's actually happening, you'll be like, are you stupid? Like, you see you're a lion? You don't have to pretend you're a sheep. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly the response to your comment. That it's so hard to see for us the most obvious thing, because for any belief and any conditioning that we have, we find proof for it. It doesn't matter if I think I am not good enough, I will find always proof for that. I will see that there's others who are better than me. I will find that, that I was not good enough in that situation, because I have this belief. If I think I'm not a good driver, I would find 1,000 reasons why I'm not a good driver. I touched the curb when I was parking. I got a ticket, a speeding ticket. I don't know, like, I didn't make the parking in the first go. and so on and so on. But if let's say the same person has the belief I'm a great driver, it would just automatically eliminate all the bad experiences and always focus on the good experiences, you know? And what we're saying here is that it's not necessary to have any belief. And the only freedom that I see is, you know, that is basically when we are able to see what we're not. And we're not anything that can be seen, that can be perceived, that can be touched, and so on. And even that what that is thought and felt. So if yeah, I mean, it's that simple. Like anything that's on the basically on the game board that is visible and perceivable, you're not that. So, and you know, when you have the question of, I don't even know, I'm confused, am I this, am I not this? The answer is you're none of that. And you know how we always say is, this is a very important step to do to eliminate everything we pretend to be or we say we are as a first step. So that's sort of, we take ourselves to be the separate entity. So we buy into separate, you know, like imagine we live in paradise. We are paradise. It's so overflowing with everything, with complete joy and love. And like the lion in the story that I just told, we pretend we're a sheep. And although nothing has changed in reality, that we're still the lion, but we pretend, and that's so strong. I mean, we see it, no, when we watch a movie, we start crying, or we're so into the movie that we're like really, you know, in the story, and we can get lost like this. And it's exactly the same way here. Like, I mean, you can't even describe it. There's so much love and joy and everything here, right here. There's no requirements needed. And something in us believes it cannot be like this. It cannot be that easy. Life cannot be that simple. We always sort of, it's much easier for us to believe in that we have to work 10 years to get somewhere, and we have to do like really hard challenges to be able to, you know, to get a little bit of that bliss. But it's exactly the opposite. So instead of looking for happiness and looking for liberation and freedom somewhere down the path of anything, it's enough to see that we are already there and we have never left it. And yeah, that's the only sane thing I would say that is out there. And I think the story that I told about the lion and the sheep tells that in a very beautiful way, because let's go into that a bit, because you know there's also the thought of, yeah, one day I want to become like a lion, right? So in spirituality, this would mean, oh, one day I'm being enlightened or I'll be liberated. And so imagine the lion saying, oh, one day I can become like a lion. He wouldn't care because he is the lioness. He's experiencing it constantly. And the sheep, that like the lion that pretends to be a sheep, if he says it, it's a sad story because he is already that, but on a conceptual level only. He is so busy with his concepts that he doesn't see that he is already the lion. And that's exactly what's happening constantly every day. So how much time does it take for the lion cub that takes himself to be a sheep to become a lion? No time. There's no time required. There's nothing required. If at all, if you wanted to, it's about letting go. But even if that lion doesn't let go of the idea of a sheep, he can't change the fact that he's a lion, you see? So from that perspective, no matter what he believes, he will always be a lion. And that's exactly the message here. The message is, be what you cannot not be. And as soon as we go a bit too far from that message, as soon as we think, oh no, but I can become a better version of me, oh no, but I can become really good enough. As soon as we leave that, we go basically onto the path of suffering in a way. But the good news is, even if it seems like we're suffering, we never really suffer. And that's, you know, it's something very liberating, because we're constantly liberated. We're like the blue sky you know, with a blue sky, and there's many clouds coming and going constantly, and nothing, no cloud, no thunderstorm, no hurricane has ever left a mark in the sky. And that's what we truly are. You know, when we meet people, right? Let's say they have a depression, or they have a really, you know, bad loss, or something, you know, really had a trauma in their childhood. There's something in us that tells us sometimes, you know, this stays forever. It's like so deep, that pain, that it will stay forever, and I can, whatever I can do, I can't get rid of it. But this is not true. This is assuming that what we are is the body-mind, and that something has been hurt. And yes, the body-mind was hurt. You know, there's no denial, but no denying of that. But what we truly are, and what we only are, was not touched at all. So if we have the story that I was touched and I was really hurt in that moment, then we buy into the idea, I have to get healed and I have to do everything, and I will never be fixed fully again. But this is just a story we tell ourselves, and that's where the beauty comes in. So no matter what happens, so you know, the analogy with the screen and the movie, it doesn't matter what explosions are happening within the movie. It doesn't matter how many murders are happening. It doesn't matter whether there's a war movie or anything. None of that has ever had any impact on the screen. The screen, when there's an explosion happening in the movie, the screen is not touched by it. When there's even a love story happening, the screen is not more love or anything like this. That's exactly what we are. When we take ourselves to be the action figure, and then we were like, oh shit, we're constantly worried, what's going to happen to us, what's going to be happening to us. But the movie will end anyway. But what will stay is the screen, and that's what we are. And you know, as I say sometimes, consciousness is not a function of the brain. It's not a function, the screen is not a function of the action figure. Consciousness is not infused through a body-mind. There's consciousness like the screen, and in consciousness you have the movie happening. So it's an appearance and a disappearance within the movie, within us. So this life, all the perceptions, all the events that are happening, all the feelings, all the thoughts, even that sense of self, it's all happening within us. So it's like, you know, saying we are not in the world, but the world is in us. And obviously, by the world is in us, we don't mean the world is in this body-mind. The world is in us means there's consciousness, awareness, and there's all the form that is happening, and that's happening within consciousness. So, and you know, this is like one of the toughest and hardest things for us to realize, is exactly because this is so fast. This identification with that sense of self is so fast. It's faster than a shadow in a way. And so, and in a way, as I said, the solution is not to believe in this and then try to find a solution for what you believe in. But the solution is before that. It's prior to that belief that we buy into. Like sometimes, yeah, like, you know, let's take this lion and sheep thing again. So the solution to the lion who pretends to be a sheep and wants to become a lion is not in trying to become a lion as a sheep. That's never possible. But it's to see that this lion has never been a sheep. Even when it pretended so much and believed it so much, it never became reality. And that's where the solution is. So, you know, and there's two levels which are very important. That's good, because there's also confusion. You could say, hey, you know what? I am none of this whatever is happening here, and I don't take any responsibility. So as the action figure, so I don't know, I just do whatever I want. I just eat the food I want. I get drunk. I don't care about anyone and anything, because it's just, you know, Maya. It's just a big illusion. But that's not the point here. The point is to see that it's much deeper than that. So that's one of the level confusion. That means in the movie you would basically say, you know what, it doesn't matter, I can just do whatever I want on the screen anyway. So, but the point here is that not even that is happening because that's all intellectual knowledge, right? But what's actually happening, and the only actualized thing is the screen, the only reality is the screen. And the level confusion happens from exactly that. I take myself as the action figure, and I think that's me, and that's why I can operate that action figure and I can do what I want as this action figure. But that's not the point, because I am not that action figure. So I'm not operating that action figure. It's just happening on its own. And as I always say, you don't have to believe me, and you should never believe me, because you can experience it on your own. You just have to sit down or stand or whatever and just look at the nature of what's happening. It's like this part, this body mind, is not the subject. It's not the ultimate subject. It's basically an object. And when the object takes itself to be the subject, then it doesn't feel right, and that causes suffering. But when this is seen to be an object, then something happens, and it sees there's a liberation happening, and we are that liberation, whether we have that belief of being a body mind or not. That's, it's in any case, because that what we are not is never realized. It can only be seemingly so, and that's important. Yeah. Are there any questions or comments? What I wanted to do is, like what I always say, what we're speaking about here is not self-improvement, though it's not even spirituality. I would not even call it that. It's just, it's basically just non-duality. What we speak about, it means not two. It means there's not a second. And I think it's important, because for instance, what self-improvement does, or also what spirituality does most of the times, is exactly when we come back to the story of the sheep and the lion, the lion cub, which pretends to be a sheep, what spirituality would do, or self-improvement would say, you know what? Yes, you are a sheep, and you can be the best version of a sheep that you can be. That's what spirituality is. So spirituality would, as a sheep, it would try to become better at roaring and try to get the curves and color, everything. It would do exactly that. And self-improvement as well. It assumes, it believes in an idea that we're not, and it tries to get the solution from there. And what we're doing here is we are going a step prior to that, because if life was like like a rope, and you have many knots, and there's many knots, and the knots represent like problems or challenges that we have. And and they represent challenges and so on that we have. And there's one main knot, like a very big knot, and that's the one. If we take care of that, all the other knots, they will be taken care of. And that's why I want to make sure that this is not self-improvement, because anyway, so what I want to do is I want to read out a quote from self-improvement, like let's say it's sort of a typical quote, and then I want to show what self-improvement would do, and then I want to show why that doesn't work, and how you can address it in a different way. So the quote is, "Never let how far you have to go bring you down. Look at how far you've come and let that lift you up." So that's like a typical motivational self-improvement. Again, I will read it again. "Never let how far you have to go bring you down. Look at how far you've come and let that lift you up." So that quote, as you can see, it assumes that there's one that's on a path. And obviously, because there will always be ups and downs in life, and we have made it a certain way, and achievements, which we're proud of. And so instead of looking, into the future very far of what's still coming, and we're not good enough, and we have to do all these things in order to become a little bit self-worth, we should think about our achievements, and that will motivate us to go further. That's exactly something that keeps us in the prison of of what we think we are in. Exactly that. And yeah, and you know, the more we buy into that, the more the deeper we will go into that. And what we're doing actually is, you know, there's the saying of, so by Ramana Maharshi, he says, presupposing the existence of a non-existing thing and then trying to get salvation for this non-existing thing, doesn't that just reinforce that whole thing? Exactly. And that's what we do when we try to find a solution as that self that we're not. That brings us deeper into the problem, and deeper and deeper and deeper in a more subtle way, but it will be deeper. And at some point, we're just like, you know, nothing is working and I feel really depressed and everything. So when we look at this quote, so instead of saying, hey, you know, how can I motivate me in going forward? It's not about trying to motivate you to go forward and be like, oh, how can I deal best with all the challenges in life? But it's about questioning that one which pretends to be that one being on that path. That's where the solution is. It's like, you know, I give that other example. I work a lot with analogies. So the other analogy is you're lying in bed, you're dreaming, you're creating a dream world, obviously, when you lie in bed, and then you take yourself to be the dreamt object in the dream. Yeah. And when you pretend like to be this dreamt object, you can, let's say you have a problem in the dream that you, I don't know, you cheated on your boyfriend or girlfriend. And then you try to find a problem you try to solve this problem in the dream. So you go to therapy sessions and try to do all kind of spiritual stuff. And you will never find the true solution. So the true solution, instead of buying into the idea that you're a dreamt object and you have to find a solution, is to realize that you're not a dreamt object. You're the one sleeping, you see? And these are two different dimensions. But that's what I'm pointing to here, is that don't try to find a solution after you have bought into the idea of being a sheep, but see that you're a lion already, and see that this is already your experience. And it's more like about letting go of some beliefs that you have, a conceptual thing, than actually something. So anyway, here's a few comments and questions. So one here on Zoom, the hard part is surrender to the fact that we don't need to do anything. Yeah, so let's talk about that. The hard part is to surrender to the fact that we don't have to do anything. Exactly. So when you take this from the perspective, let's stay with the lion and the sheep analogy. So from the perspective of the lion has to do nothing in order to be a lion, because he is already a lion. And the one that pretends to be a sheep, which is actually, it's not a reality, right? Because it's just conceptual, it's just a belief. That, in a way, would need to do something. Yeah, so you see, what you are, it cannot do anything, or it doesn't have to do anything, because it's the ultimate reality, it's the absolute. But that which pretends to be a sheep, on that level, it makes sense to do something. Let's say, you know, the solution for this sheep was, or that seeming sheep was, to go to water and see itself. And so if we can do something, I think it's exactly that. What I also said earlier to the other comment is to continue question, like asking, who am I? Like there's a thought coming, oh, I understand it intellectually, but it's not my experience. Like who is thinking that? Where does that come from? What's the source of that thought? Is that 100% true? Who is it that has that thought? And when we ask those questions, and not just on an intellectual level, obviously, but you truly ask, you sit still, and you see, where does it come from? Like, who is thinking that thought? You will realize on another level, in that silence, that it does not exist. And through that experience, in that moment, the more you experience that moment, the more there's an opening happening. And that's important, what I said earlier, because when we constantly every day run after that belief of, oh yeah, oh my God, yeah, I'm not good enough. Oh shit. So now what I do is, I have bought into this belief I'm not good enough. Then guess what? I have to do so many actions of proving to myself and the world that I'm good enough and actually more than good enough. So how exhausting is that? We buy into this idea I'm not good enough, and everything we do, or many things we do, we try to prove that. But why? Because we have bought into the idea. If we understand that we're not, that what we are is not good enough, then we don't have to do that. And that's the beauty. But yeah, it's exactly that. So on the level of the sheep, or on the level of the movie, there's something that can be done from that perspective, but it doesn't even exist, that, you know, that thing that thinks it can do something. But from that, what we are, that's the good news. There's nothing to be done because there's no doer, and that's the main point. All that's happening is basically there's only one reality, and everything else is an unfolding of it, and there's no second, and that's the whole point. There's no second. So here's a few more comments. So, but who will notice that the lion is not the sheep, but the lion? Shouldn't I be careful if the mind isn't interfering, is recognizing the true nature that I already am? To be aware of the habit of the thinker to constantly make himself. Yeah, that's another trap. It's also a very good one, because as you said, it can get very, very subtle. And so let's go to that question again. But who will notice that the lion is not the sheep? Who will notice that the lion is not the sheep, but the lion? Shouldn't I be careful if the mind isn't interfering in recognizing the true nature that I... Yeah, exactly. So you can say that whatever message is coming from the mind, it's false. And that's a very hard thing to do, because, you know, we take a lot of identification in this is right and this is wrong, right? That's sort of how we grow up. This is right, this is wrong. And we always try to attract positive thoughts and try to avoid negative thoughts. To see that any thought that comes to us has nothing to do with us, has nothing to do with who we are, and is not from us and about us. That's an art, but that's in a way the solution to freedom. Because as soon as we take some of those thoughts to be ours and important, and they define of who we are, then we also get all the negative thoughts. So the only way to be really free is to see that the whole thought stream has nothing to do with us. And you know, it's not easy, because in a way it's very easy, but in a way it's not easy. It's not easy because we're so used to creating the reality with that mind that it feels like we have to give up on everything in a way. But when we give up on this everything, there's nothing comes, that space that we are, and it overtakes everything else. But yeah, that's a tricky part, right? Because the mind, it may tell us, like, you know, what happens a lot is the following. Let's say we get an idea of this, and there's a subtle thought of saying, yeah, I understand who I am and I know who I am, but this is still the mind. This is still the sheep saying, oh yeah, this is still a concept saying, the sheep is like, oh yeah, guess what? I am the lion, but I am the lion because I heard it's good to say, to affirm I'm the lion, but it hasn't seen it. It hasn't seen it through. And that's another, you know, it's an evolution as well, but go further, like go more radical. And who will notice it? The answer to that is also obvious, because there's only like the lion. The sheep doesn't even exist, no, in that analogy. There's only the lion. So what's happening is there's a self-recognition, not the self what we take ourselves to be, but that what we are. So the lion recognizes it's the lion, because the sheep doesn't exist. So here's another comment. Hello and thank you. I just listened to Rupert Spira on YouTube, and he answered to a question by saying that the illusion Mayan never disappears. Only the ignorance disappears. What's your thought on this? Yeah, it makes sense. So maybe I go a bit into that. So what I assume what he means by that, or I can just elaborate on that. So So when he says the illusion never disappears, it means that the thought stream and feelings and even that sense of self is always there. It means, like in the analogy with the movie and the screen, the movie will always be being played, that it will continue to play. But the difference is, when I see that I'm not the action figure in the movie, is that I don't mind what happens in the movie anymore. There's a distance, there's a knowing that I am not the actions and the events in the movie. And that's the like, you know, the Buddhists say, first there are the mountains, then there are no mountains, and then there are the mountains again. It's like that. So the illusion, it will always, it never disappears, because it will appear and disappear, appear and disappear. But the ignorance disappears, and the ignorance is that we have forgotten what we are. So we identify with the phenomena of, you know, of the objects, and then the phenomena, they will stay, but the ignorance of taking ourselves to be one of the action figures, that will go away. So what he means is that the screen is still there, we still are aware of everything, but we don't take ourselves as the action figure anymore. So that's my take on it. Here's another question, also from Upstream. Does it mean that I still wear my orange glasses and see the world through them? But now I know that what I see doesn't look like it appears to me. Yes and no. Because what I just explained, you know, I said the illusion is still going on, the thoughts are still coming, but there's a clear understanding or seeing that those thoughts are not from you and about you. But, and that also changes in a way the orange glasses that you have. So to some degree, use let's say, no, I'd say when you take this analogy, I would say no, the glasses are basically gone, because when you take the glasses to represent the perspective on you have on life, that will completely change. But yeah, I would just say that. Do you have any other questions or comments? As I said, you know, this, like, one of the things, like, people always ask, you know, okay, great, it sounds great, but how can I do it? What are the, like, 5 steps? What are the methods? What are the techniques? And you know, there are many techniques. Once you have bought into the idea, there are many techniques to calm the mind, to be motivated, to become the best version of yourself. There's many techniques for that. But in my eyes, they're not even close to it being effective as when you see what you truly are. It's not even close. It's a whole other ballpark. It's a whole other league. So, but if there's something we can do, it would be what I said earlier, is to always stop. It's not like going faster and going further. It's more like coming back, going upstream. Like if there's a river, you don't go down the stream, but you go upstream, and you go to the source of the stream, and you will find the nature of the stream and the source and the problems. You will find them at the source. And that means, for instance, the example I gave, when the thought comes, I'm not good enough, or I understand this intellectually, but it's not my experience, then ask, you know, because something in you gives a reality to that, gives truth to this. It puts your trust into that belief, into those thoughts. And so the solution is not to do that, not to put trust. It's a fabrication. It's like something we have to do, but it has become so conditioned that we oversee it. And by catching those mechanisms, by catching those beliefs, when we're able to go step a level, then we are able to do that. So the best thing you can do, if there's anything you can do on that level, is to just ask yourself, you know, where does that thought come from? Is that thought about me? And that will always bring you back to, that will, you know, make sure that you don't get lost in the story, and try to find a solution to the story, but this will always bring you back to where you already are, which you have never left. And so, yeah, it's about eliminating. And another thing you can do is to see that whatever you can speak about, that whatever you can talk about, that whatever you can define is not you. And basically, that's a huge thing, because so anything, so Benjamin, this body, mind, thoughts, feelings, it can all be perceived, right? That means I'm not that. So any story, as soon as I think, for instance, I'm not good enough, or oh, will I have enough money next week? It's not about me. The only interest I show in that is because I think this is about me. I'm an object. I'm a long-lasting separate entity. That's why there's an interest. But when that interest goes away, there's this thought may still come up, but it has nothing to do with who you are, and you see that, and you see the beauty in it, and that's it. And yeah, that way the illusion is still going on, but the ignorance has gone. So here's a comment on Zoom. So we're not even the screen. I mean, yeah, you could go that far and say you're not even the screen. Like we spoke about it last time, that there's a different levels of let's say reality of what we are, because there's the separate entity, there's the oneness, there's awareness, and then there's the formless. So but yeah, let's not go too far into that, because it can also become very conceptual. So but yeah, you could also argue that. So yeah, I'm glad it helps. So let's do last question. What would you say about intuition? Is it a virtue of the body mind, or the formless, or does it even exist? Yeah, it depends what what you call intuition, but how it's usually used. I mean, usually it's like the mind is so strong, and then there's another voice which we call intuition, says, "Oh, you should do this," but I mean, at the end, it's just another conceptual construct, because, well, like as I said earlier, there's no second, there's not two. If there's no second, then there's not one thing is one thing is intuition. There's the voice of my intuition. You hear that a lot, no? Like in self-improvement or spirituality. Don't listen to your mind so much. Listen to your intuition. But what does that even mean exactly? It's just another voice. It's another more subtle form of the mind in a way. That afterwards, after the intuition comes, and we say I should have listened to my intuition, or now I'm going to listen to my intuition. But it's just another game that's happening in the mind, if you ask me. Because, as I said, if you say, for instance, I have to listen to my intuition, it's two. There are two. There's you as an object and as a subject, and then there's the intuition that you use. It's already two. But what exists is just an unfolding of everything. And so I would say there's no such thing. It's just very confusing. It's like you end up being, okay, I should listen to my intuition or my thoughts, but most people who believe in that, they struggle a lot with, okay, but how do I know this is my intuition, or how do I know this is my mind, and what should I listen to? So it creates, in a way, even more conflict. Okay, anyway, so here's already the time is ticking. So last question from our RK Musings. What is your opinion on this pandemic in the larger spiritual form sense? Is this me? Whoops, this is a lesson for all of us on the screen. Okay, I will take that question next time, because we can go into that if you like. Okay, glad that you feel like this as well. But as I said earlier, this is not about spirituality, what we speak about here. And if you want, like, my short answer to our RK Musings is, this is just another movie that's being played on the screen. So, does it have significance when you are identified with a dreamt object? Yes, it's huge. Does it have a significance when you see, and not only when you see, but when you are the screen? It has zero significance. It's just another thing you watch. And but that means when the action figures in the movie, they will try to do something about it, right? But in my opinion, it's the good thing is we have nothing to do with it. So yeah, there's no worry about it, because it's just another movie that's being played, and it appears and disappears, and something else will come at some point. But when we're very, lost in it, it can get hard. But we're the screen. Anyway, here I see time is ticking. So thank you very much, everyone. We do this on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. this time. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hi, Ilaria.
Hi.
Hi. I just stopped Instagram
Yes.
live. So yeah, how was it for you?
Yes, it's very clear. Well, even though it's not so clear, I mean, the subject it's not so easy, to handle, because it's not so, it's not so easy, but you make it easy. So I thank you for this.
Yeah.
So that's very easy the way you explain, and so I'm getting into it. But my problem is to make it very intellectual, always, So I understand, but then it's not easy to turn from the understanding into the real experience. So that's that's one of my points.
Yeah, and it's in a way also like, an evolution on that, as a seeker, let's say. It's like, first of all, we hear about it, we're like, oh wow, we're intrigued by it, and then we try to sort of understand it, with how we used to operate, right? With putting thoughts around it and trying to understand. That's sort of the tools we usually use. And then I think at some point, I feel like the more, there will be like clicks happening. So the more, in a way, you try not to understand it with your mind,
Yeah.
the more you let go of that you realize, hey, actually, I don't have to put that energy and be like, okay, I need to
Yeah.
understand. The more you're able to let go and be like, hey, you know what? I let go, and maybe there's not so much control I have, and you put your trust more into, into life itself, and into surrendering what you said, the more you will experience the solution from the solution.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's a process, and it's not. So,
Yeah, I understand. Yes. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
so are you from Hamburg or?
I'm from Italy.
Italy. Okay. How
Yes,
did you came out through Instagram?
exactly.
Ah,
Yes.
okay.
So I couldn't find the link in Instagram to watch this direct, and so that's why I went to your, I don't know if it is your site or your website or something. So, and I clicked on the Zoom conferences. Do you prefer me to come here or to come to the Instagram
Yeah,
thing?
actually, Zoom would be better. Most people are on Instagram, but actually, it would be better if everyone is on Zoom. But somehow that's.
Okay.
But yeah,
So
come on Zoom. I think it's easier.
okay, so if it is okay for you, so is it on Thursday, right? Next
Every Monday and every Thursday at 7 p.m.
Thursday. Okay, so I will be back on Thursday on Zoom again. So if it is
Okay.
okay for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.